Founder fans, Jason here, and today's founders are James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. Specifically, we're going to be discussing their relationship when Thomas Jefferson returns triumphantly from France. And to join us and help us learn about these two founders is none other than James Madison portrayer himself, Mr. Kyle Jenks. Kyle, thank you so much for being here with us.
Jason, you sound so enthusiastic. Thank you for having me so I can be Kyle today instead of Mr. Madison and be jovial and excited and everything to talk about this great topic. Happy President's Day, everybody.
Happy President's Day to you. I forgot to mention that. Thank you for bringing it up. So, Kyle, let's talk about James Madison. Now, specifically on this President's Day, we'll talk about these two presidents. And tell us, when Thomas Jefferson returns from France, he's a little bit late to the show. Washington's already president, and Madison is already in the House of Representatives. So, what is the atmosphere? How does Madison feel when Jefferson returns?
Oh, well, I think he's thrilled that he's returned. I mean, those two have kept a correspondence going ever since the debates at the Philadelphia Convention in 1787. So he's chomping at the bit for Jefferson to get going. But you're right that he's late. I thought I would preface some of what we're talking about if I could share with your listeners, watchers, a book. This is a great resource for preparing for today. Andrew Burstein, Nancy Eisenberg. Which way do I go here? It's backwards, I guess.
We can see it, Madison and Jefferson by Bernstein and Nancy Eisenberg. She wrote the Aaron Burr book, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I haven't read that book by Aaron Burr, about Aaron Burr, but this book here is tremendous, and I highly recommend it. And it really gave me everything I needed to talk about today's conversation. If you don't mind, I kind of wanted to preface it. The situation that you're asking about was really summed up well in the book, because it took me a long time to figure out how this term, the pathological decade, came up. And it comes from this book. And sometimes the textbooks in the schools, they focus on wars, and they focus on the Revolutionary War and the French and Indian War and the Napoleonic Wars. And that's something I'd like to bring up today, is the international situation that was brewing during this pathological decade. That is full of intrigue. It is full of divisiveness. It is full of things happening about implementing the Constitution. And so a quote from the book says that once George Washington became president, the Constitution was no longer a theory, right? They had to undergo field trials. So this sets up the idea of what the situation was for these guys. And so the decade of the 1790s, they say in the book, was very reactive. Very reactive. It saw conflicts instigated not only by words and events, but by words and events. But even that did not explain the violence of mind and nearly nonstop public bickering of a nation in flux, which I think is a great way to describe it, in what deserves to be dubbed, they say, the pathological decade of American history. So the arrival of Jefferson late, sets him behind the eight ball a little bit. It's a little bit comical, really. He gets to the shore in Norfolk on September 25th, 1789, and he immediately goes to Monticello. And on his way to Monticello, he stops in Richmond to pay off some debts. And then he spends some time in Monticello making, catching up with the house itself, which is always in a constant state of renovation. And then he finally decides that he's going to head out to New York City. And on the way to New York City, he stops to see Benjamin Franklin in Philadelphia. Well, Benjamin Franklin is about to die. Benjamin Franklin dies April 17th, 1790. So he has some of the last words that Benjamin Franklin, ever had in his life. And he gets also one of his massive migraines, which he's known for. And all the while that Madison is waiting for Jefferson to arrive, he's got a terrible attack of dysentery. So he's not feeling good physically either. So it sets up the human environment between these two magnanimous figures, which I like to bring out as an interpreter, not just the issues, because that's the textbook version, but this is the human version. How do you take a country that's in flux and react to the things that are going on and start these field trials of the United States Constitution that was written a couple of years before? So Madison writes to Eliza House Trist that he thinks that Jefferson, quote, is over the worst of his fit of the headache, and he has had a severe time of it. So it's many, many weeks sometimes that these migraine headaches hit Jefferson, and he's sort of incapacitated. So he gets to the Capitol, and he really can't even do anything and participate because he's physically sick. And then we get to, the issues at hand that I might turn it back to you to prompt you for a question or so.
Sure. Well, I do want to just shout out, I'm glad you mentioned Elizabeth House Trist. She was the founder of the day just 3 or 4 days ago, actually. So we were just talking about her.
Yeah.
Now, so it's interesting. So Jefferson arrives in New York, and Madison, although he was sick, he had been kind of furiously working to organize the government, at least from the House of Representatives perspective. If I'm not mistaken, he was already creating putting together the first Judiciary Act, trying to organize the judicial branch, and things of that nature. So when Jefferson arrives, Jefferson notably was a little bit, he wasn't necessarily as enthusiastic about the Constitution as many of the other founders. Maybe you could speak a little bit to that kind of atmosphere between the two, where Madison obviously was a fan of the Constitution, and Jefferson came back, a little bit, like you said, a little bit out of an outsider when he had been an insider for so many years. Perhaps you could tell us how Jefferson and Madison, their early conversations when he arrived, what were the topics they were talking about? Or I guess I should say, what was like most urgent in Madison's mind in what's late 1789 when Jefferson finally arrives?
Oh, I guess I'd have to pick the influence that Hamilton was having on the president. Right. The vigor of the executive was very prominent in Hamilton's mind, and because it's a field trial, Hamilton has this grandiose idea of how he wants to pay back the national debt, and it's a little bit of a fight and a war between how that gets done. And the Jeffersonian approach is, we don't want to be in debt. And Hamilton says, well, we have to be in debt in order to get good credit. We have so much, not only domestic debt to take care of, but foreign debt. And the influence that Hamilton has with his force of personality is noticed by Madison. And very early on, those Federalist essay compatibilities that they had begin to break apart. So Hamilton, I think, is probably the biggest factor that I would bring up, and the creation of the National Bank, the assumption of the debt. And of course, we could probably talk about the dinner deal, which may or may not have had such a great impression on the actual conclusion of the issue. It may have affected it, but what I got out of the resources was that the government is still operating. These guys were not so powerful that whatever they said was going to take effect necessarily. So they had the dinner deal, the assumption, the Residency Act, the National Bank, all these things that the country was going to fight to get in action versus in theory. And that's what was going on.
Yeah, I always find it so fascinating that Hamilton and Madison worked together so closely through the latter half of the 1780s, and then almost immediately, once the job is finished and the government is created, they immediately become leaders of the opposition parties. Which, I know Jefferson generally gets the credit for being the leader of the Democratic Republicans, as we call them now, but Madison was obviously one of the head honchos of that party himself. So their relationship does continue. Obviously, Madison and Jefferson are famous for their relationship, but over the ensuing years, Jefferson obviously becomes disenfranchised and leaves the Washington administration, and eventually Madison also, I believe, doesn't seek re-election. Which one of them kind of becomes ready to go back to Virginia first? Do you happen to know that, or maybe speak directly to Madison, because I know you put more research into Madison. When does Madison basically say, all right, I need to get back to Virginia now. I've had enough of New York and Philadelphia?
Well, with the election of Adams and the dichotomy between the theories of government, neither Madison or Jefferson had any intention of participating in his government because they knew Adams didn't want him there anyway. So they were both, I think, rather equally decided to go back to their farming life, but Madison was a very astute observer of what was going on, and so was Jefferson. So from afar, they were keeping their hands on the pulse, so to speak, but they were officially out of it when Madison or Adams had his single administration.
Excellent. Well, Kyle Jenks, thank you so much for joining us. That's our time. Are there any last tidbits you'd like to
add? Well, thank you for everybody that tunes in. I'd like to give a shout out to Jason for the incredible work that he does and for him giving me the privilege of appearing for the third time, I hear.
Yes.
And I will be having a YouTube video go up with Jason's work here. And follow me on Instagram. I post pretty regularly. And it's at Madison Portrayer. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, this is the second time you're here as yourself. One time as Mr. President Madison. I don't know if that counts as the third time or not. I think it does, though. Thank you so much for being here. Now, Founder fans, again, I'd like to thank Kyle Jenks. Like he mentioned, I have a link to his Instagram account down below. If you just want constant American Revolution goodness in your life on Instagram, follow him there. I also have his Facebook page down there, too. I don't know if we mentioned this, but he actually portrays James Madison down in Philadelphia and elsewhere. So thank you so much for joining in, and I will be back to you with another Founder tomorrow.